Hey, what's going on? So, I did a video on what's happening. Everything that's planned is happening right now. And I did talk about one of the aspects of this agenda narrative is called the Wildlands Project. Um, what is that? Well, it's nothing new. And the Wildlands Project basically is going to force people to leave their properties and land, and they're going to have to move to population zones, okay, where they'll have stack and packs. And we're talking, there's a map, and they've been following this map. The map was actually drawn up in 1991, and they enforced it in 1992 at Regional de Janeiro Earth Summit, where 18,000 people showed up and over 100 countries signed up to it, including our president. And so everything has changed since then. And it's also, the Wildlands Project is part of the agenda, 2150 and 2130, 50, and yeah, that's right, 2130 and 50. And so you could read these books. Everything that's happening today is right on schedule. This is 30 years ago. And when they put this together in 1992, it was supposed to be a 200-year plan. Okay, but right now it's in full swing, and I did do a couple of videos on it, but this one's about part of it called the Wildlands Project, where they're going to, basically what they're going to do is they're going to take 50% of America will no longer be habited by humans. In other words, you can't set foot on it. And then another 20 or 30% of that land will be what they call corridors, where these are areas where animals can roam freely, okay, from core through a corridor to another core area. I'm going to explain this in a minute and define it. And then there'll be what's called buffer zones, where that's where your government people and your animal counters and all those people will be able to visit and set up their laboratories and things like that. The rest of us, we're going to live in little small areas, high population zones. We're not going to drive much. We're going to have, they're already giving us social scores, and they're going to throw in the carbon print. It'll be near like high bus stations and rails, and I talk a lot about that in another video. But so the Wildlands Project, and there's a paper you can buy, I used to be not on the fence on this, but I think I'm on the fence now because I actually believe some of this stuff, and some of it's kind of logical in a way. All right, and it'll explain why the cattle ranchers are losing their property, why the government's not let them. You heard about all those lawsuits where they were grazing on land, and now the government says no more land for you. And there's a reason why. What happens when you overgraze the land. There's a reason why, they changed the flood maps. Like right now, Florida, they changed the flood maps, or I'm sorry, the watershed maps and the near the Everglades. Okay, I think they needed like 5 more million. Okay, acres, and they changed the maps and said people can't live there, and I guess 16,000 people lost their homes and farms and things like that in Florida just recently. And this happens with farms where the government bails out farms. They're doing it all over the place, and they have a bad year. They give them money, and then they got to follow their rules. And once they take that money, let's say they're doing corn, and corn was no longer sustainable for that area because whatever, the water changed, and who knows, but they can't do anything with that land other than corn. They can't switch it to another product. They can't split it up and sell it to a developer, And even on small areas, just locally, I have a friend who has got 15 acres of land just outside of town here in Cleveland, Geneva area, Thompson, and he wants to put up a barn so he could farm the land. And they make these new rules where you can't put up a barn. In this particular place, you have to put up a full house. And so a lot of this people are discouraging the use of the land. In some cases, they're taking it away. And then you have a whole new thing happening all over the place. For example, in Florida, they're making it difficult to even insure homes in hurricane zones. So if you want to insure your house, it's going to cost you, like $7,000 to $10,000. And if a hurricane hits it, you might not be able to get money. You might not be able to get insurance for it, okay, or you may not get a loan for it. That happens in fire zones. So they got fire maps in California. We've had all these fires, and those places burnt down, and then it becomes a fire zone, and so the insurance companies don't want to cover it, and you can't get any money for it, so those people have to leave. And this is happening simultaneously all over the place. And all of a sudden, you don't even hear about like the bike paths and the trails. I mean, the bike paths, they went through millions of people's, not millions, yeah, probably millions of people's properties all over the country simultaneously. And people fought it in court. And they have just throw money. They print more money. I had a friend that was fighting a bike path. They went through, this is up in Huron, and he fought it for like 10, 15 years. He eventually died fighting it and spent all his money fighting it. And so this is not an accident, folks. Agenda 21, 30, and 50 is happening, and so is the Wildlands Project. So real quick, let's talk about the Wildlands Project, and I'll give you more examples here in a minute. So it's funny how, there's a lot of articles, papers you could read, and one of them is called Rewilding of North America. And of course, it was written in Denver. Okay, they call it Volume 76, Issue 2, Synopsis of the Wildlands Act of 1964. So they knew about this stuff a long time ago. Matter of fact, in the 1960s and 70s, they already knew that we were having extinction issues, crisis. They call it extinction crisis of animals, and some of the things they realized back then, okay, and which led to the Wildlands Act of 1964, was they realized that the populations of many species were diminishing. They were losing ecosystems of all kinds, and this is happening all over the world. So this isn't just going on in the U.S. Tropical rainforests, they realized, they're sawing them down, they're torching them, and the coral reefs were dying. And, there's other reasons for all this. Like, for example, the coral reefs, well, we have what's called the Sahara dust, right? Desert dust that comes over, and that's not helping the coral reefs, I don't think, but they don't know, but the coral reefs are dying. Ocean fish stock are crashing. And, this is huge because there's a lot of extinction going on with starfish and a lot of sea urchins. And a lot of it has to, people got to look at also nuclear, because in the Pacific Ocean, there's all kind of deep death going on, an extinction event of the ocean, because those reactors are still leaking. Okay, and if you go to the tide pools in the west coast and the west part of Canada, the tide pools are like they're almost dead, and that's all because the Pacific Ocean is dying, and it's also dying because of nuclear. Okay, I mean nuclear, that's an extinction event, and I don't know why this world is pushing for the nuclear reactors, and they gave them 5 more years. They want to call it, green, and they want to call it renewable. It's not. I mean, Russia has burned up forests that are radioactive and causing polar bears to become emaciated and skinny. They're not starving. They have leukemia. I mean, they dumped a bunch of radioactive submarines in the oceans. They dump barrels in the oceans and all kind of testing. And I have lots of videos on that. Then there was a lot of the large game, gorillas and rhinos and tigers were killed and shot, and they had hunting, and they call those charismatic mega fauna. That's what they call these big things. In a minute, you're going to see how important these are. And this is made. We're probably going to lose 50% of our land because of this. Frogs vanishing, okay, and then and so on. And so, so basically, they're saying now that we are in our sixth extinction event. We have a sixth extinction event, and this article that I'm talking about, which was issue 2 synopsis of the Wildlands Act, January 1998, and it was in Denver. And Denver, right? That was the first place that didn't allow you to collect rainwater from your gutters, right? And basically, they started this whole Wildlands Project in 1991. They wrote it, and in 1992, it got put into Agenda 21. So I looked up these extinction events, and I mean, I don't even know how to count back this far, and I don't know where to come up with all this. And sure, I don't know how they prove it, okay? Because, a million years is a long time, right? $1 million is a lot of money. To count to a million is a lot. So they're saying 440 million years ago, extinction event number 1. And that was called the Age of the Fish, where basically ocean temperatures rised, and it killed 75% of fish and the CO2. Okay, the temperatures rise. Then sometime later, like 253 million years, that's really sometime later, right? They had another extinction event, and that was where they lost reptiles and mammals and amphibians, and basically 90% of the species vanished, okay? And that was because of volcanoes. Then, like 50 million years later, 50 million years, think about how long that is. 201 million years ago, they basically lost 80% of the dinosaurs. Once again, it was volcanoes and temperature increases and ice melting and sea levels rose. 66 million years ago was the the fourth extinction event. And they said the day the dinosaurs died. And the reason for that was an 8-mile asteroid apparently blasted Mexico at 450 or 45,000 miles per hour. Bada bing, whacked everybody. Okay, and that's 75%. So now they're saying extinction number 6, and this is basically man, right? From eating food, growing food, manufacturing processes, traveling, warring, and breeding. When I read this article, we only had 6 billion people. So this article is probably, 20 years old or 30 years old. So we got, 8 billion now, okay? And what was it? I thought this was great. I saw this quote by Bruce Wilcox from 1980. That's from 1980. Death is one thing, but to end birth is another. Okay, and so back to this Wildlands Project. I got some notes. I'm kind of jumping around, and so it goes back. They've been talking about doing this. They knew it was a problem, and so today everything's in full swing, and that's why you could, like Bill Gates just purchased tons of property, and the Chinese are buying tons of property, and I don't believe they're actually going to do anything with this land other than bring it back to this Wildlands Project nature. And it's all part of their agenda. It's all part of the Wildlands Project and the rewilding of North America. In 1920s and 30s, there's some publications, the Sierra Club, and they had all kind of conferences that went on from 1949 to 1973, and they've all been part of this. And there's some big names like Aldo Lippold, Bob Marshall, Brooks Range, and Olaus Muir. These people are all big players in this game here, and they're all different. Like for example, Aldo Lippold, he was like the wildlife management, okay, for many organizations. Well, anyways, so there's a lot of players in this game, and you can look up those names if you want. In 1991 is when the Wildlands Project officially was I guess documented. You could actually see this map. There's a map of this Wildlands Project, and you can see the zones they're core zones, they're big red zones surrounded by red and yellow, which are corridors, and corridors are designed so animals can roam back and forth. And then there's buffer zones, and then there's humans. So there's not going to be any trains going through these areas, okay? They're going to be all, and that's where all the trains are going. That's where the cities have money. You ever notice how, like, certain cities have storefront renovation programs, and, you get money and you get tax abatements if you do this, but if you try to do the same thing, and let's say out in the country somewhere, there ain't no money. You ever notice how the president, you guys are making fun of the president because he wasn't fixing roads, bridges, and dams, out in many places, like, oh, we don't have the money to fix the infrastructure. Dude, they're not going to fix it because it's part of this program. We signed up to it in 1992. We signed up to Agenda 21, and the Wildlands Project is part of it. I'm what's called a towner. I made up the word. And like I travel, and I don't travel freeways because I don't want to look at billboards. I'm not in a rush to go anywhere. So I go, there's always a town that's between 7 and 11 miles apart, because the reason they did that was because horses needed to take a break, right? And that's also where they had the mail stations. So when I drive these towns, like, it may take me 3 days, to get to Tennessee, or 2 days, because I'm going to go through 60 or 70 towns. And I like to stop at these towns and I study them, and it's amazing how a lot of towns in these zones are empty. They're ghost towns. So when you hear of ghost towns, there's a lot of them. And ghost town doesn't mean there's ghosts in the town. It just means you drive through the town and all the storefronts are empty, and there's an antique shop, and there's little egg shop over here where they make breakfast for you, and then the buildings are dilapidated, and the people aren't living there, and they're moving out. And so these areas are not fixing roads. They're also taking out all the dams, and the Colorado River had dams. They took them all out because, the excuse was, well, the salmon might come back. And another thing is, they're using what's called presumptive thinking. It's not factual, and I'm not going to say it's wrong, but the salmon might come back to the Colorado River. They're never coming back, but they might. Well, okay, if they might come back, let's take the dams out. That's what they did. They took out all the dams. And so basically, I was going to try not to say that word basically. It's like, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Ever talk to someone? Yeah, you know what I mean? So basically, I'm not going to say basically, all right? I am trying to read some notes, and I'm not good at reading notes. So in 1991, there was, these were this is how they grouped it out, that there was extinction dynamics. Okay, we talked about a little bit about that. Now, we're going to talk about island biogeography. This is the big one. Island biogeography, metapopulation theory, large carnivoral ecology. That's the biggest thing, is the carnivores, And then, of course, natural disturbance ecology. These are the 5 things that are important. Now, one of the important things which caused a lot of this whole core thing to make 50% of America not habitable by humans was island biography. Now, I'll start off with the basics. So if you have Hawaii, that's really far out there, and it's very hard to get there. So you got to swim there or whatever, how to get there, on a log, I guess. And so it was never connected to land. And so there's a whole different thing that goes on there, all right? But you also have islands that are connected by bridges. And what I mean by bridges, not necessarily like man bridges, I mean like land bridges. So, for example, one would be Vancouver, and there's a bunch of these. And the bridges, basically the island used to be the land, a big piece of land, right? And then 10,000 years ago, we had the glaciers melt, and then it broke off these areas. So these large pieces of land became small pieces of land called islands. And the problem with islands is the large species leave first, and you can't sustain an ecological system without the large animals. We're talking, like tigers, bears, moose, rhinos, big things. And they're the first ones they leave. They need a lot of land. there's not a whole lot of core land for these animals, and so they leave or they become extinct. National parks all over America are too small, way too small. Even you would think like Yellowstone was big. It's actually not big enough. Now, something that's big enough that would sustain one of these engineered ecological wildlands project core areas would be the Canadian Rockies, big enough, okay? And so what happens is they call it the species become, they wink out and it's relaxing of the species. So when you break a big area to a small island like a park or a small area because roads and bridges were put in or farmlands came in and they split it up and defragmented it, the big species leave. And when big species leave, the whole thing crashes. So basically an example would be that if you lose the big species, okay, then the white-tailed deer and elk take over, and they get too big because no one's killing them, right? Not in America, and there's tons of them, and so they eat and kill the trees. So now they help deforest. So the forest areas don't get bigger. Plus, of course, we cut them down and we create fires and all kind of stuff. But let's just talk about from an animal standpoint. So the deer eat the trees and the trees can't grow. So what happens then is everything starts getting messed up. And I could follow one species. So let's just do the songbirds, okay? The songbirds, they would come and migrate, and they need big forest areas to live. They got to go in the big forests and big core areas. And if there aren't any, they got to go to these small forests. Now, the problem with these songbirds and other bird species, and that's why we're losing a lot of them, is because they can't hide and be safe. They need deep forest. And who gets them are what's called nest parasites. And the nest parasites basically follow cattle and ranches and things like that. And they come up to the forest and they want to, these are birds, okay? And the bird I'm talking about is the cowbird. And the cowbird will not go deep into the forest, but there isn't a deep forest because we don't have these core areas anymore. So the cowbird will just fly into the woods, and a songbird has a nest with 3 eggs, and the cowbird will lay an egg in there. Well, you ever walk by trees and you see little baby birds and they don't even have wings, they're just dead, like, wow, what happened? Well, if you knew what happened is the baby bird got pushed out by a cowbird. And so these eggs are bigger and they hatch first, and they take all the resources from the male and female songbird or other birds. We're just going to say songbirds for this case. And they just take over the nest, and they eventually kick out everybody, and there's no more babies, okay, except for the songbird. And that parasite starts taking over and starts killing all the birds because they can't hide in a deep forest. Because in the deep forests, there were no big animals, and the elk killed the trees, and the white deer killed the tree. So it's kind of this crazy thing that goes on. And you could do this to a lot of different species, and that's what they did, okay? And that's what they decided, that we need to bring back the big animals, and we need big core areas. That was the whole point of this. And basically is to bring back, we're losing a lot of species. And so so the national parks aren't big enough, okay? Now, we talked about Florida, and I think I gave that example a minute ago. That was they were like, wow, what's going on? In Florida, they had 7 million acres, which was, already parkland. And they realized that it wasn't big enough. So they needed another 5 million acres. And so, of course, they increased the wetland maps and kicked the people out, and now they took their land. And there's a lot of people in Florida complaining about this. They have these rallies all the time. And I remember I went down there, to teach some seminars, and I ran into these people, especially around the Everglade areas. These people were pissed. They're out getting their land taken away. But nobody in America up here that hears about it, because they're not going to tell us. They don't tell us about people losing their land. Well, what about all the people around the water? Okay, what they do with the water, if you have a beach house, okay, and this is what they do. This is crazy, but this is what they do. So we'll just say there's 10,000 people living in one town, okay? Town A. And a lot of those people live near the beach and they have beachfront properties and etc. Well, the surrounding properties, let's say there's another 10,000 people in this that live 50, 30, 40 miles away. And what they decide is they'll take a survey and they'll send out 10,000 surveys, but they won't send it to the people that live by the water. They'll send it to people that don't live by the water, and it'll be about, well, do you want to use the water too? I mean, should people have their own beaches? Like, no, we want to use the water. So they fill out these forms, they send it out. Maybe 300 come back, and all of a sudden they say, okay, you people, we're going to change the laws, and you no longer own the beach because now you own the high water table or the low water table. Let's see, the low water table. If it was the low water table, then you'd have a beach. If it was a high water table, you don't have the beach. So they would say you own up to the high water table, and maybe you'd lose your beach. So this has been going on all over, simultaneously, all over the country. And that's just beaches, and you got the same thing with the farm people. You got the same thing going on with the ranchers. You got the same thing with the horse people. They're all getting beat up. They're all losing their land. And you got your philanthropy. They actually call it, Bill Gates, a philanthropist. It's called Wildlands Philanthropy. Imagine that. Wildlands Philanthropy. And basically, these are acquisitions of large pieces of land, and they say by conservation-minded people to maintain for ecological values. Okay? And right now, there's only two large ones. I mean, in the past, there was 1917, McKinley National Parks, there was no roads. And of course, the Everglades don't have any roads, right? And now they're trying to get more and more and more and more. And all these things are going on. And and so let's move on a little bit here. And so we talked about why this is happening. We talked about that we have an extinction event. Well, they're calling it an extinction event. We talked a little bit about of examples of what they call metapopulation dynamics and island biogeography theory. We talk about islands, right? Small parks, islands. An island is just a small area that has been broken and defragmented from a large piece of land. And that's why we have to have cores and corridors and buffer zones, which is going to encapsulate probably 90% of America. Actually, we're only going to be living on 5% if you look at these maps. And if you put these maps that they came 30, 40 years ago and look at the progress, it's totally amazing. And, they have floods, weather modification. I know you guys, some of you don't believe in that. I'll do a video on it. It's all happening at warp speed. They can control a lot of the weather. And we talked about, we need to bring in carnivores. Carnivores are the larger animals, and they can't survive unless we have cores. So we got to provide cores for them, okay? And so this is happening in the Wildlands Project. It's happening, at warp speed, okay? And this is kind of interesting. And when they're doing this, they rewild. They call them focal species, focal, not local, focal species, and they want to restore the survival and healthy conditions of these ecological areas and create them. So one of the focal species, they call it the keystone species, and those are the large carnivores. This is the number one thing. Like, and they even throw in the beaver because it has a lot to do with the dams and how the elk mess it up for them and the deer. Okay, and so you start from the top of the chain and you work your way down. Then the next one is called umbrella species, and umbrella. I'm thinking trees, but these are called wolverines and jaguars. And so they cover large areas of land. They travel a lot and they need large core areas. Then they have what's called flagship species. And these are basically to build support of all the species. And then they have what's called indicator species, and that are sensitive to ecological changes. So they could certain species, and the one they use is the northern spotted owl is what they use. And so The regulations, America's changing laws, regulations. They're making it hard to build. The codes are changing. The zoning is changing. It's going to be too expensive, to build homes. They're tearing down homes, tons of homes, so they can make room for stack and pack because single family homes are no longer sustainable. You should be able to live in 400 to 800 square feet. You should be able to work in your home, live in your home, eat in your home. You're not going to be able to buy, if you live in Ohio, your little stack and pack town isn't going to have bananas. You're going to have to eat strawberries and peaches, pears, and apples. But the people in Florida they're not going to get apples. They're going to have to eat pineapples, oranges, and bananas. Okay. And travel's going to be limited. They practiced it on that one day. Then Billings came down for a whole week. There was no airplanes, and now they had this thing, this social engineering event that was a cold that went around, and that was a whole nother aspect of this whole thing. Okay, and so people learn to not to travel so much. They work out of their homes, and they also learn to do things through the computer like Skype, and gas prices are up. I mean, there was no cars in any of the lots last year. I mean, new cars you couldn't even get parts for cars. And of course, Mr. Obama did the Clunker program to get rid of cars. They're not fixing roads. They're not fixing bridges. They're doing crazy stuff here in population zones, and they're putting buses in and bike lanes. I mean, look at the bike lanes everywhere. I mean, I down on 72nd Street, there's bike lanes that have been there now for 10 years. I haven't seen I don't think anybody owns a bike down in the hood over there. Okay, I got a building over there. I never see bikes. Okay, if you had a bike, they would just steal it. I don't know. They would sell it to somebody out in the suburbs probably. But so basically, they want to stop carnivore decline. And in other words, they're going to hunting, trapping, poisoning. I feel sorry for the deer hunters. First of all, you have to have a gun, right? And they're changing that because some of our new laws, they haven't been enforced yet, but if you have a mental illness, you can't buy bullets and guns. And one of our presidents added in a few executive orders, one of which is that if you take medication for mental health, like, depression medication or pain medication, you're on that list. They haven't enforced it yet, but they will. I'm not going to get into that whole thing. But you have to first be able to get the bullets. Then you got to get a tag, and then you got to get a license, and then you're going to have to find a place to where you're hunting. Then you'll probably have to barcode the deer. And once you get the deer, you have to take it to another place to check to make sure it doesn't have any parasites. That's happening right now. So it's going to cost you $500 to shoot a deer or more. So they're going to discourage all that, and our kids, they come to colleges, they teach them a bunch of things. One is that facts are man-made. Listen, don't argue, don't ask questions, and so they're being kind of like conditioned already, and don't eat meat, eat insect hamburgers, and I'll do a video on that because that's happening too big time out in other parts of the world. So they want to quit grazing, okay, because that they call that degradation of riparian area, ripe, I don't know, RIPARIAN areas, whatever that means. But that basically means overgrazing and water diversion. They want to change the water. Okay, they're going to make it so you can't take water and use water. Like in Colorado, they wrote this paper. There's places you can't take rainwater from your gutters. That's happening a lot of places. Before you know it, you'll be taxed for that. Okay, fragmentation of habitat. They got to stop that. They're doing that really good. Roads, dams, bridges, towns that fragmented these core zones. They're not fixing the roads and bridges anymore. They're not. And like I said, I town. And the reason I town is because I hate freeways. I can't deal with people speeding at 80 miles an hour. You guys are in a rush. I have no clue where you're going, why you're speeding to get there. I mean, who's your daddy? Who's your boss? Who owns you? It's amazing, and I can't deal with the people beeping out. So I go side roads, plus I get to drive through towns, and I get to see what's happening in this country. And I've been driving, I mean, I just came from California, and I drove towns all the way home. It took me 10 days. And you know, I did some 66, I did some little towns, and I seen so many vacant towns, empty towns, it's unbelievable. You know, where the freeways moved and where the towns, people left the towns, and there's like an antique shop left, you know, and we're talking thousands of towns all over, and we don't know that, you know, because you know we come home from work, and hey, thanks, Robert. Yeah, I'm gonna try to do more videos on these topics for a while, and then I think I'll start back on my book again, probably in January. The elimination of the national process. Okay, we got to stop the elimination national process. And what does that mean? You know, we can't. They do fires. They start fires. Okay, we can't do it. If there's a fire, it has to be started by lightning. And that's good because lightning starts a fire, let's say, in a large park, and the fire is good because then new stuff starts to grow. Okay, but not other kind of fires. You know, natural floods are good, natural fires are good by lightning, but not man-made. And then, of course, damage to the ecosystem. You know, logging, farming. Farming is damage, right? They're trying to feed it's 6 billion. In my notes, it's 8 billion. But the population is decreasing. I have an old video on that. The census is kind of like hiding that. The census, it just came out. You better read it real close to see what's really going on. And so this is what's happening, man. It's happening right now in front of us. It's happening 24/7, and it's not going to end. It's not going to end. And now, after we've had this cold that went around this whole world, and I probably will do some kind of derivative video on that. Changed a lot of things, and then we've had all kind of people splitting up. We've had social engineering going on, and so now we're splitting up the conspiracy people into little teeny groups. We're splitting up the Republicans in little groups, and the Democrats. We're breaking everybody up in little pieces, and there's all kind of things. We have riots where certain cities, there's damage being done, you know, and all this is all part of this whole big program. It's part of the agenda, and the agenda is been going on at full swing. And the Wildlands Project and Rewilding America is just one aspect of this. It's just one little aspect. It's not a little, it's a big aspect. But explains, you know, don't sit there and cry why your president's not fixing roads and bridges and dams. He's not, because he's not allowed to. We signed on to this. Don't yell because they took down the dams. They have to take them down because we signed on to this. This is us. This is what's happening now, and it's not going to stop. Now, if you're going to go buy land, you better check this out, because what are you going to do? You're going to find a piece of farmland because you want to be a farmer, which is, I would love to do that too. But the farmer's selling it real cheap, and you're like, wow, that's a great deal. And then you get to the farm and you buy it, and you find out maybe you can't put in a septic system. Maybe you can only grow corn. Oh, you're not going to be able to split it up, especially if that farm guy was subsidized, you know, given some money because of a flood, or they subsidized him or paid him not to grow one year, and he's going to follow some rules. Okay, you can look a lot of this stuff up. It's all in the books. It's all in Agenda 21, 30, and 50 books. Some of the books you can't get because the United Nations got rid of them, but they're still out there, and there's all these organizations, all these NGOs are all part of this. All them fancy words. I have a video called What's Happening Today. It was all planned, and it's Agenda 21. It's about an hour long. I try to explain a lot of this in that video. I'm not going to do that here because this was about you're going to get kicked off your land video. You're going to get kicked off your beach video. You're going to be told where to live. You're going to live in a stack and pack without an elevator, 3-story building. You're going to have a bike lane in front of you and a train station. Okay, and I'm 61. I'm going to see that. If I can live 20 years, I want to see a lot of this. my kids are going to be living it, and their kids are going to be slaved in it. And so it's about the animals and the rocks, the birds, the bees, and the trees. And that's what's happening in America. It's going to be, people are going to have to move out of 80%, and they're already doing it. And 50% of it will never be walked by any human once this is established. And once these parks are done, the core areas will never be walked. The corridors will connect cores to cores, and it'll be surrounded by buffer zones for only like governmental officials and people into counting bears. Hey, thanks for coming on. Please rate and subscribe. I do have a service I'm a home inspector. I've been doing this for home inspections for almost 40 years. So if you can't solve a problem in your house, I do have a service, Call Marko with a question. You just Google it, M-E-R-K-O, Call Marko with a question. A lot of times, most of the time, 98%, 99% of the time, I will solve that on the phone within half an hour, 20 minutes. Also, please rate and subscribe. And there's a bell, hit that, and you get some of my videos. I'll probably do more videos while I can still remember this stuff. For the next month, I'll do a bunch of these that all relate to what's happening on this planet, on this world, and what's happening to us. If they don't tell us about it, you're not going to be able to see this on The View. You won't see this on Fox. You won't see this on CNN, MSNBC, and you surely won't see it in your periodicals. And if you try to search for this stuff, Google's going to make it real tough. Real tough. But you can find this stuff if you know how to search for it. And sometimes you got to go to a library, or you got to tap into a library. Sometimes you got to do some file sharing, Anyways, hey, thanks for coming on. Please rate and subscribe.